At least, where do we find you these days? What part of the world are you in?
I'm in my son's bedroom because I live in New York City and everybody's working from home today. So we're all like picking our little corners. But yeah, I'm in New York. I'm in Astoria, Queens,
Nice.
where I've lived, I don't know, since the pandemic, 5 years or so. What about you? Where are you at?
I'm in the suburbs of Chicago,
Oh,
and
nice.
yeah, like you, I have 4 kids, so they're all home right now. So
We're coming through Chicago for our series we're going to be doing called the Anti-Ice Supper Club, which is going to be an event
love it.
series raising funds for uh, immigration relief, illegal aid, things like that. And I think it's going to be in like March, or if we're smart, it might be a little bit later, because I want to wait till that gentle Chicago winter turns into
Yeah,
spring.
yeah,
But yeah, I'll let you know when we're
yeah.
coming
Let's stay in
through.
touch on that. That'd be great. And at the very least, we'd want to help promote it. But it'd be great
Yeah.
to meet you in person.
Yeah, totally. I'm very psyched. I got family roots. All my immigrant family came through Chicago, so it feels fitting somehow. So
Oh, that's great. Well, if you're ready, let's get to it. I've had so much fun researching you, and what a lot of cool things that you've been able to do in your life so far.
thank you. I appreciate that. I feel a little like Forrest Gump. Like, I'm very lucky to be bystanders to some very big moments. But yeah, I'm enjoying it so far.
All of it. So you spent a lot of your life reporting from outside the U.S.
Yes,
And
that was my dream job.
yeah, well, when did leaving America become the fastest way for you to understand it?
It's a good question. I did in my early childhood. I grew up on a tiny island, Key West, Florida, which is, 3.5 by 1 miles long and in the middle of the frickin' ocean. And I didn't leave a lot. And I think, nobody does because it's like the land of the lotus eaters. It's so nice. You just kind of hang out and fish and, ride your bikes around the island. So it did leave me this feeling of like distinctly wanting to go and see more and do more. And I got to live there with a grandfather who'd been very imprinted by his experiences fighting in the war. My grandmother ran a French restaurant. She was a Francophile and loved going to France and, kind of talked about Europe. And so it was this mix of like me being from a very small, beautiful, but very small and kind of slightly claustrophobic place and wanting to get out. And then just this family history of people telling me stories of the great beyond.
Mm.
So I went to go live with my father in San Francisco. And even that was for high school. And even that was not quite enough. I spent my senior year in Germany in the eastern part, developed a severe affection for kind of dark, blustery Eastern European ways, and that was it. I was just kind of off to the races. I just it's nothing quite like getting to explore different languages, different cultures, different politics, food,
Mm.
everything. It just kind of hit from a very young age, and after that, I was just kind of chasing.
Wow. So was there a specific moment abroad when your sense of America's identity cracked or shifted?
It's a good question. I mean, you mentioned you have children. My children are teenagers. I recognize a lot of myself in them. I was insufferable as a teenager. I had a lot of like identity issues too. I was trying on a lot of things. I remember going to Germany, and even though I couldn't speak German when I got there, I knew enough. I had studied some Russian. I started rolling my R's, not to even pretend I was from anywhere in particular, but just to not sound American, So I was one of those guys. Like I just had a hard time being American at that point. I mean, this was during, the first Gulf War, and I hadn't quite learned how to be an American overseas, to be honest. So I think there was always that sense of like we have to enter rooms with a unique humility as Americans. Now I feel the same way about Chinese travelers. I feel the same way about Russians in the places that they kind of overwhelm with visitors. Indians, there are superpowers and there are colonial superpowers, and that's a burden that we have as a member of one of those, I think, to just try to set yourself up with a humble first step.
Mm.
I guess. So,
Yeah. No, I totally understand that. In fact, it's embarrassing. My first trip to Europe, in hindsight, I realized I was that obnoxious American.
mm,
And about 20 years after that, I went to Africa and many trips after that, and just realized exactly what you were just sharing. And it was embarrassing, but it was also a great life lesson to realize that who am I to think I can just roll into this place that isn't my home and do all the things. So I felt that, and yeah, and I think about that actually often.
I will say, I mean, this is not probably speaking to direct, things that I may or may not have done that were obnoxious American things, but I have also learned especially in the time that I had living overseas, you really learn to appreciate what America does have. And ultimately I had a chance to move to Russia, as a teenager and go and work there. And I decided to come back, and I went to college in California, and I met a Californian woman, and I ended up spending my life with her. And a lot of it had to do with, feeling this kind of common culture. And it's also a very immigrant based culture, which is, incredibly unique around the world. And I think, going back to that very first question, I think it does teach you it teaches you a lot about your own country to try to build a life somewhere else or imagine a life somewhere else. And I liked what I saw in America, from very far away. It's like how gorgeous the earth looks from space.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how I felt about the United States, and I wasn't wrong. I mean, I do find myself at times in the somewhat uncomfortable position of, like, defending the hell out of the United States, warts and all, against, all comers at various points, even though our politics and maybe my politics might align with theirs. But I think particularly in Europe, you have a lot of real, like, internet savants who have
Yeah.
lots of opinions about America. They're very, very ill-informed, and I don't have a lot of patience for that. I think, this was and will be an incredible country, um, with all the demons that we have. Still, I'm a big believer.
No, we're aligned there. And there's so many things to get from where we just were to where you are now. So let's try to get there in our time. So you just kind of threw something out just really subtly. So what were you doing in Russia?
I went over originally to teaching English gig. I love the literature. I speak Russian, although, worse and worse every day. And then I was trying to set up an exchange program over there in Moscow in the early 90s. I went back. I finally got a chance to go back as a journalist in the mid aughts. And that for me was kind of what I'd always wanted to do. I'd written for the Moscow Times from the US just about diaspora Russians and Ukrainians. And to be able to go to Moscow and return as a journalist was great, because my first journalists I ever met in my life were, I was just kind of homesick. So I went to Rosie O'Grady's, which was an Irish bar, and I was maybe 19 or something. And would just drink with these British guys, mostly British and Canadians. And they had amazing stories, and they were such great shit talkers, and they were so much fun. And I was like, this is my tribe. Like, I could get with this. And I still know some of those guys from those early drinking days. And so Moscow was really the beginning of my love for journalism in that way, because it's such a fascinating story. It's also a kind of a wild, good time. Unfortunately, it's all gotten a lot darker than
Yeah.
that. And I do not foresee myself being able to go back while the current regime is there. That was for a long time kind of my North Star for journalism and where it could take me.
Hmm. Yeah, let's talk about that. So you ended up being a foreign correspondent for Time Magazine.
That's right. Yeah, that was I started, at the bottom. I was like a stringer in Seattle, and kind of slowly worked my way up through the politics beat in New England, and moved to New York. And from there really got to do a lot of the foreign assignment stuff. Unfortunately, I had these dreams of, and this, we'll get to Roads and Kingdoms, but my dream was to go to lead the Moscow bureau, or to go work and be a part of that. By the time I got the juice internally and was, in the position of power where that might have happened, my job actually turned out to be to go to Moscow and shut the bureau down and hire a freelancer to just file stories. And it was that moment of decline really for the news media and for print news weeklies in particular that gave me a lot of pause, because I think a lot of the ideas of how I thought, my career would go and also just our industry would go were kind of falling apart. We were just losing steam as an organization at time, and that really started to give me the impetus to think, all right, I need to build whatever ship I'm going to sail on this ocean. I think I might have to build it myself with friends, and that's what ended up happening.
Hmm. Well, before we move on to the next stage, from my um, maybe ignorant perspective, it feels like the idea of neutrality is starting to feel incomplete or sometimes non-existent. Like, what was it like for you back then? If you can give just our listeners a sense of what that's like, because in some ways it feels like being a foreign correspondent would be just like exciting and also just challenging with all the things you have to try to navigate and figure out. Am I glamorizing it or underplaying that?
No, I mean the ability to go into a place and basically say, "Take me to your leader," and because you were working for Time Magazine in particular, you could. I got to interview a lot of potentates and heads of state, and that was really interesting access to the halls of power. But at the same time, you always had this challenge of trying to make sure that you weren't getting snowed. I remember the first time I ever went to Georgia. I met people who I'm close with to this day. I thought then, and I probably still think now, that they were kind of really bullshitting me on some some key points, but because, we just relied on our local fixers and reporters, you really have to kind of use your own instincts and as much due diligence as you can do in a couple weeks to figure out, what's what. And that is a daunting task. That's what would keep me up at night. It's just making sure that I wasn't misreading this situation in some large sense. And I think that, was one of the great challenges of the job. But as far as objectivity, I mean, they always said that the second largest, kind of foreigner's house outside the U.S. ambassador in Moscow was the Time Magazine bureau chief or something. I mean, you just never, you were in power in a way, as that kind of old line U.S. media. And I think that presented its own inertia, its own, kind of point of view. And one of the things I really loved about early internet writing, even in news, was that, people had license and were almost obligated at some point to explain who they were and where they were coming at this from. And it did kind of get past what I thought was always a bit of a fiction, that we were, just reporting without any perspective or any point of view. We had a definite point of view. It was a very centrist, kind of close to power, American mainstream point of view on everything. And that, that is its own, that is not objectivity. It's not bad, but it's also not this kind of neutral voice of God thing that I think, kind of pretended that it was.
Mm. No, thank you for that. So you've used like food, drink, and pleasure as entry points into difficult stories. So I'm curious, when does pleasure clarify the truth and when does it start to distort it?
That is an interesting question. I think by the third drink, right? There's that line. I mean, is it 2.5 drinks, 3?
Yeah.
Where it's very clarifying and liberating, and then all of a sudden you're in the, kind of throwing your arms around people and weeping over sad songs together. I find that as an entry point, it's incredibly helpful. And even when you're talking, maybe especially when you're talking about difficult things, it was one of the great epiphanies I had when I met my co-founder at Rose and Kingdoms, Matt Goulding, who was a food writer. And I was I considered myself a much more serious individual. The stories that I was doing, I found that he was every bit as smart and well-informed as I was about the politics and history of a place. He could just explain it while working on a story it was actually called "There Are No Nachos in Mexico." That's the story he was writing when I met
That's
him.
a great title.
It's a great title. He had like 3 weeks to report that piece, and I had just gotten arrested in Cuba for, like retaliatory reasons, and I was working on a story that I tried to make entertaining and fun, but it was still going to be a Time Magazine piece, and it was still going to be, I thought, under-resourced and not given enough real estate. And I met this food writer, and I was like, Well, shit, like, you don't have to get arrested to tell great stories. You know, you can do something that is, talks about something so universal that you can break through compassion fatigue. You don't have to treat people always as kind of either victims or villains. You can have just the basic humanity of this very common desire that we have to seek out food, to use food as comfort and guardian of tradition. That's all so common among everybody on earth that I think it's a great starting point to talk about even the most challenging places. Now, where does it stop being clarified? This is a definite, fear of mine that you always end up on the wrong side, because in the early days of the war in Syria, we were reporting pieces about, traditions and market stalls. And at what point are you just kind of going into the war zone asking, like, hey, you got any good tacos here? That's what was that documentary now? Like when they were making fun of ICE and saying like, where's the best place to get Coke in Gaza or whatever? It's just like, there's an element where you can just be pleasure seeking in a way that is so tone deaf. So I am worried about that line. I know that we have always taken great care to make sure that we're not going to get anybody killed in this process, that we are being as safe as we can be with our freelancers, and knock on wood, we've managed that over the 14 years we've been in business. But you want to make sure that you're using food as a very like kind of measured way into the story, and not just saying like, man, but I know there's a war going on in Somalia, but they really know how to use cardamom. It can be overdone.
Well, it just feels like a natural transition from food into your connection with Anthony Bourdain. How did he enter your world?
One of the jobs I had at Time Magazine was as the editor of the Back Page 10 Questions franchise, where we would ask celebrities 10 questions. And it was something we did for the magazine. I was the editor of the front and back of the magazine at that point. I hated that job because, celebrity culture is fairly toxic, to use a newer word, but somebody in there, whether it's their agent or them themselves, somebody would just kind of make you feel terrible for having been involved with them at all. And I've met a lot of well-known people and hated them all, to be honest. And then in comes this guy who I didn't even choose. Like, I was not a Tony fan, but he took the subway in. He was, it was back in his leather jacket days. He and I had both had daughters right around the same time. We were just talking about that. He spent like an hour and a half just asking as many questions of me as I asked of him. He really wanted to know about the Baghdad Bureau and what people were eating there, and like what life was like in foreign correspondence. And I was totally charmed, because when he opened his mouth, he spoke in full paragraphs the way that you know him. He was every bit as eloquent and biting and righteous. And I think from that moment I was like, that is an interesting person. This is the first like person I'm glad to have met in this particular gig that I had at Time. So when we started up a year and a half later, Matt had known him, I think, socially a little bit. And we both were like, yeah, if we're going to mix food and journalism in some new and authentic way, we should definitely let Tony know. And he would be a perfect person to partner on some level with. I have to say, he escalated from there. Like, he had a whole plan for why he wanted to get involved with Roads and Kingdoms. It quickly became for him, I think, a haven for a possible life after television. And he was so disciplined and focused and had so much clarity about, his own path, that we were just like totally taken and ready to go on the ride. And it ended up being very much worth it. But we were the only company he ever invested in. This was not a habit of his, but he had a very kind of intentional plan with how he would partner with Roads and Kingdoms, and how he could help us and how we could help him.
Thanks for sharing that. Was there a time post Tony that you thought maybe it was going to be hard to go forward?
Yeah. I mean, like every day, I think for years. Yeah. His agent had this interesting thing to say. Kim Witherspoon, very smart woman. She said when Tony first announced his intentions to us in a public meeting somewhere, like, whatever these guys want to do, I'm in. Like, this is, I want to be with Roads and Kingdoms. She was like, he definitely means that, but just so you know, like his shadow tends to cover even things that he wants to support and, have their own life. He ends up influencing them because his world is so big. And this was at the beginning of CNN. He was just getting bigger and bigger. And she was very right. So when he died, obviously we had personal loss to deal with, and just, from our relationship, and really the as much as I admired him and enjoyed spending time with him, there were a lot of people who were very close to him in that way. But for us, then we also had the business side, which is we had a whole office in Brooklyn. And at that point, we had become a little part of like Tony Incorporated. So, we had to eventually, we lost all that money. We had to let everybody go and just come up with a new vision for things. But we had to do it without the guy who had for years been providing like such a North Star, and also just like cold hard cash. He was such a great, he was like a pirate. He would do a lunchtime panel with Capital One and say, here's some of that money, like go and spend it on something weird. Spend it on like some dark, he's always tell me like, just remember to keep it darker, more lurid, and more transgressive. That was his advice. And that to me was an amazing partner, because he would actually be able to fund these things we wouldn't have funded otherwise. So yeah, we lost a lot on that level. And it was actually a friend of his, the Spanish chef, Jose Andres, who was an old friend of my partner Matt's, and a guy that I'd gotten to know well. And he was the one who kind of, I think, got us out of our.
By the way, I love him. He seems like an amazing dude. Is he an amazing dude?
He's a hurricane. I mean, that was what I used to call him, Hurricane Jose, because he is just, he's so kinetic and he gets so much done. And he's just like, ideas are like shooting out of his eyeballs like flames. And he can be really intense to be around because he's got these, big visions for everything and everybody and himself. And I'm just blown away by what he's accomplished, even in the time that we've known him, which kind of encompasses that the birth and growth and miraculous existence of World Central Kitchen. So he is that guy. I mean, his role with Roads and Kingdoms, particularly the League of Travelers that we started, was essentially to get Matt and I on a Zoom. I think it was during the pandemic, and we were like probably being super, sorry for ourselves, in lockdown and broke, and Tony's dead. And he was like, guys, this seems like a pretty small problem in the world of problems, but if you want to solve it, you should just go and do those trips that you were talking about. People love that. They'll travel. And once the lockdown's over. And then he gave us some money to go and start that part of the business. And that was it. I mean, it wasn't a long conversation, and it wasn't particularly like gentle. I mean, he was kind of busting us up for being, such self-pitying dudes. And that's the power of Jose, I will never not listen to that guy, because he was absolutely right. And he also helped put it in motion. He's not just spouting off, but he actually made it work. He said, go to Asturias, where he's from, like his original kind of native land. And it's a miraculous part of Spain. And we ended up having that be our first Spanish trip. And I was just talking to the guy that he works with, Jose, this morning, and we were talking about our next Asturias trip, and everything that Jose said in those 5 minutes of just breaking balls turned out to be very meaningful and a great business, and a thing that's really sparked Roads and Kingdoms revival.
So thank you for that. I'm so fascinated. So Roads and Kingdom, it just doesn't feel like it wasn't built as a brand. It's built in a response to something. And what was it responding to?
I think compassion fatigue above all. The sense that people couldn't put themselves in the shoes of the people I was writing about or the places I was writing about. You could just feel it. That's why we were shutting down bureaus at Time Magazine. The editors here in New York said, people don't care. They don't care about Abkhazia. Like, they can't pronounce it. They don't know where it is. It sounds pretty messed up. But I always felt that if you could come in and hit them with the culture, with the music, with the great ripping yarn. We sent an amazing Welsh writer to Abkhazia who's obsessed with this chili sauce they make called ajika, which is just this gorgeous paste of like fresh red chilies and garlic and salt from the mountains. And the article he wrote was called "A Sauce of Glory, Pride of Abkhazia." He interviewed the vice president all these, you know,
I could just do a podcast of you giving me titles to all these great articles. That would be amazing.
I mean, it's such a good, and like, you can't read that piece and not like die for Abkhazia. It's an amazing place. It's very messed up. But when you get into it through the way that everybody from like the auntie in the market to the vice president of the country is like going nuts over this chili paste and like how they cook it and what it means to them and like how they, you know, how they hang out on a Sunday and use it. And when you taste it, it's like the sun rising in your mouth. All of a sudden, you're in this very different frame of mind than any reporting I ever could have done for, you know, mainstream news organization. So that was the response. How do you fight this kind of glazed eyes thing where people are like, I don't really know where that is, but tough for them.
Yeah. So give for the listeners just the first of all, just the 10,000 view of what Roads and Kingdoms all about.
So Roads and Kingdoms started as food and war. It's basically acknowledging that food can be an incredible lens on humanity, whether it's in conflict time or in some places that are far post-conflict. And that's it. It was a digital publication. We started as a Tumblr, I think, in 2011, and moved on to publishing on our own site. And then with Bourdain, we were able to do a lot of filming projects with him. We won an Emmy. We won a bunch of magazine awards or Beard awards. Like it was a very like intensely quality focused, kind of always teetering on the edge of bankruptcy, but like very authentic in its love for, I think, a certain kind of immersive storytelling, which in some ways we were a little bit out of our era. You know, digital publishing in the mid-teens was not about immersive storytelling. It was about clicks and getting venture backing and scaling. We were doing something completely different. We were just, you know, publishing really immersive pieces about people who, I don't know, were lynching dog thieves who were trying to sell dogs for meat to feed their meth habit in the Central Highlands of Vietnam. Like these were not listicles.
Right.
And I think that style of storytelling has remained with us, but that's what it was. Just always a very independent, very kind of rebellious minded publication.
Now, when you're doing stories like, for example, like the one that you shared, just as an example, like how are you getting and finding these leads and opportunities to share that contrast?
A lot of it was the network of correspondents around the world. We were always looking for local or regional based correspondents, not just your, you know, usual suspects of British and American expats. But we did have success in a way because the rest of the media economy was sort of falling apart. And you had these incredibly talented writers out in the field who were looking for outlets, who were looking for editing, who were looking for mentorship as young writers. And they just didn't have the traditional channels anymore because, you know, Newsweek and Time were not providing that in that same way. The Economist, you know, barely either. And that was where we kind of did our best work, I think, is finding writers who were really hungry and had something to say and a good style, and then just giving them a rough edit if they needed it, which is ironically something that has been lost as media kind of lost its footing. Like, you know, editors who cared enough to make, you know, writing better. And we did a lot of that. So it was very connected to my networks and my time when I was working at Time Magazine, but we were using them for a very different kind of storytelling.
So since that moment till now, how is Roads and Kingdoms evolving, and what is the new brand?
The new brand, my answer is I hope I'm being authentic when I say the new brand is same as the old brand. Like, I would love nothing more than to keep every ounce of that vibe and that energy that we had with Bourdain. The engine, you know, the thing that's keeping us connected and really alive as a business is something I would not have expected when we started this, which is it's in life, like real life connections with people. So it's mostly through these trips that we're offering now, which are these very high-end, super curated kind of bits of living journalism that are week-long kind of very deep dives into our networks, into some of our favorite places, using food again as kind of the lens, but talking about everything of these, places that we really admire around the world. That has been, since Jose started beating us up about it in the pandemic, that has been the idea that's kind of kept us going as a business and helped us bridge, I think, the time between Tony's death and where we are at now with a new publishing, kind of energy, and our new print magazine and our membership program. We needed the trips to kind of teach us about who was reading us actually, and who cared about us, and who identified with what we were doing. We met them all, and we met them on these trips. We met them in the hills of Asturias. We met them out on the beach in Angola, and they have taught us and told us essentially who to be, relationships to them. Like we are ourselves. We try to tell the same stories, but they're telling us how to engage with them, and how to use that energy that they have for us to keep us alive and in business. And that's an amazing development.
So when you ask people to read or travel or grow or gather around this work, what responsibility do you feel toward them?
We set the price high on one sense to put the pressure on us as well. One, we only do each of these trips one time a year, basically. So it's very, you're really capturing a moment, like a singular sunset, and you just need to nail it. So we put a lot of work into the logistics. We owe them that, to make sure that everything is locked in. We're not wasting their time. We also have this narrative obligation. We always want, this is something we say internally a lot. It's like, nobody should ever wonder why we are where we are at that moment. And there's always a reason. If we're in Kansai in Japan, and this week is really about shokunin culture, of these grandmasters, everything that we're doing, even if it's just a lunch maybe, but it's building along that narrative. So that's a lot of the responsibility and pressure. And also we check the tires on all the vehicles that we're on to make sure that we're not going to have a blowout on the highway and go, careening. I think there's kind of more practical sided things that we put a lot of attention into. But it's interesting when I talked to Tony about the trips, briefly back in the day. He was horrified. I mean, I think, he had these nightmares about what group travel could be. Imagine chasing the red umbrella across the piazza. But I think I kind of talked him down in the brief encounters about it. It's just imagine you're with your production crew, which is about the same size, 10 to 12 people. You're chasing great locations, great characters, and telling a story across a week. That's essentially what we do without the cameras, more or less. And that I don't think I won him over particularly. I don't know. We don't have the luxury of knowing what he would think about this, this business that we've kind of built, powered by these trips. But I feel still that we've stayed close to that energy of just being a group in search of discovery. And for a lot of people who have, more, I would say more resources than time, but really value this kind of traveling, it's an unusual and really intriguing proposition for them. It can drop very quickly into a very connected world that we've built in each place.
And that's really fascinating. As you're sitting here talking, I was picturing Tony's show, and there's so many episodes where I felt I was sitting next to him when he was trying something that seemed just incredibly gross. I would never do it. And then he talks about how good it was. And I'm like, I actually wish I would have been there. So these trips sound fascinating, because although his show was about food, I felt it was really more about experiencing the place.
Yeah. And the guy was just supernaturally charismatic, and I would have dinner or drinks with him, and you would almost look around and wonder where the cameras were, because he talked the same, in his private life as he did on television. He was just he wanted to have good arguments about culture. He could expostulate without missing a single word and tell you something, kind of some ripping yarn. And so, yeah, there was nothing quite like being in his presence in that way. But I do think that, the energy that he had to kind of make travel really personal to him is something we've learned a lot from. I remember when he was doing his Berlin episode, I'd lived in Berlin, I think I told you, when I was a teenager and then later in my 20s. And I loved Berlin. I was like, shit, you're going to Berlin. Let me just send you some DVDs. He's a big movie buff, and I had all these like old DEFA films, East German films that I was nerding out on. And it's like, this will tell you what Berlin's really all about. And, he got the DVDs. And I don't even know if he watched them. He just said, hey, thanks for that. But I'm just going to see my buddy Anton. And, he had this buddy who's, you know, a kind of California rock star who's living in Berlin. And he was true to his word. The episode is really built around Anton and his life there, and Anton cooking for him. And it made perfect sense as an episode. I mean, it had a few like B line or B plots to the episode, but mostly it was just like, this is how Tony wants to do Berlin. It's not a broad overview of Berlin. It's not a historical romp through the city. It's like him and someone that he likes spending time with talking about this place. And that gives us a lot of inspiration also, because we really plan each of these trips around the lives of our local hosts. We just find the most interesting people that we know and love and trust in the world, and then say, well, what is your Oaxaca like? And for me, that means, it's Paulina Garcia, who's an old friend of mine who runs this amazing restaurant and fermentation lab and just has great friends. They're not famous. They're not, it's not like Instagram clout. It's just like her friends are artists and musicians and, mezcaleros. And we spend the whole week just hanging out with her people and having them show the best of their world. And that's it. It's not everybody's Oaxaca. It is hers. And if she ever wants to not do this anymore, I'm not going to do Oaxaca, because her Oaxaca is the one that I know and that I want to show off. And that's a very Tony approach, I think, that kind of personalization of something so global.
That's beautiful. So tell me the levels of how someone can interact with Roads and Kingdoms.
Oh, that's a great question, because I have so many more levels now than I did 2 months ago. Because 2 months ago and for the past 5 years, it's just been these trips, which are expensive. They're like, $10,000 to $14,000 a week. And I get that is not for everyone. What we've been able to do now is we have a membership program that starts at a very kind of Substacky level for a digital publication that's starting up at the beginning of 2026. It is like $8 a month or something, and we're doing a lot of service journalism and just kind of voicey profiles and postcards from around the world. Up a level from that, we have the print magazine, which just came out, and it's just such a work of love. Yeah, it's coming to you, right? Nice. It is. Yeah, it's a lot of the storytelling that we used to love, but finally in the right medium, the right format, which is 144 pages of like heavy paper stock, beautiful color.
And how many will you publish a year?
We're just going to do one a year for now, until the market starts shouting at us that, we should do more. But I'm very psyched to have the one, and we'll just like keep running it. It's very evergreen, so I think it'll still read fresh toward the end of 26 as we're coming out with our next one. And then the top level is comes back again, I think, more to people who travel with us. So it gets you access to a couple trips that we're doing just for those members. And in all levels, we're hoping to get people involved in our kind of real life events. We're doing a series around the country called the Anti-Ice Supper Club, which we're doing because it follows with our values and our beliefs, and we're independent, so we can. And we are going to raise money for legal aid societies in different cities where we have these dinners. And we're going to have a good time and do it for a good cause. But it's also part of that learning that I really was taught by our readers and our travelers, that like we need to be together. Like we need to meet each other face to face and have them meet each other. And that's how you become something that's, in a world increasingly sloppified with AI, that's how you know it's real, is that this is like a very interpersonal connection. And I'm very excited to be on the road doing that.
So what truth about the world do you hope that Roads and Kingdoms still needs to tell, or can be uniquely in the position to tell?
Well, I will say it as a cliche, I guess, but I can't think of anything more clever than to say we're all the same. I mean, every type of human motivation and desire and depravity that one group has is shared by the other. And I can only hope that our journalism and our storytelling and even our traveling just gets you to realize that. I think that for me is, I mean, it's painfully, and especially in this season, hallmark, but it's true, damn it. And you have to be sharp in order to really hit that message home and make it compelling. You have to demand great photography and great writing and really good storytelling. But ultimately, it all comes down to that truth. I mean, there's a lot of suspicion and paranoia in this world right now, and I think about 99% of it is nonsense. And if we have any way to kind of communicate that perspective, I'll be very happy.
Nathan, I'm going to tell you a little story, and I can cut this if this doesn't make sense. But I just want to present something to you that I've been doing. And this conversation for me is unbelievably inspiring. And here's the reason why. So, 2024 had a really challenging year professionally. And then starting in 25, it just felt very much, I think will align with this. Just the world has felt crazy to me. And I was sitting with one of my good buddies. He's a filmmaker, photographer, and I'm a brand strategist. I literally, my job is to tell stories, write and connect people. And I actually do love AI for certain things. And at the same time, I just felt there was like something missing. So a friend of ours has a private bourbon bar. It's just beautiful place. I never really get to use it. And so we just had this idea where we're calling it at the table. And what
Okay.
we do is we invite four people that don't know each other, but I know them. And we have them come to this beautiful space. They can have a mocktail or a cocktail. And then we also feed them some like really delicious food. And we just curate a conversation for 2 hours. And I can tell you, we've been doing this. We had 9 reservations this year, and we're going to do it again next year. Probably the most life-giving, life hope thing I've done, because there's times where I purposely curated people that see the world completely opposite. If we were in a normal context, they might be at each other's throats. But you know what? They're the ones that connect the most. It's unbelievable. And it's gorgeous. And as I'm sitting here thinking about going on one of your trips, it's like, a bigger, more beautiful, more put yourself in a different context type of experience. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And I love the intimacy of it because screw scale. I mean, it
Yeah.
really, it really starts small and maybe it even ends small, but it still doesn't make it any less powerful. Think about, the impact that you probably have on those four people at a time in their lives. Not a thousand thumbs up from them would as be as meaningful. And I
Yeah.
think that's a powerful thing. And it's also tremendous self-care. Nice work.
Well, well, it's funny because to your point, and this is like as I was thinking about your experience, and when I asked you that question about responsibility, there's times where people will be like, "Well, what's next?" And I'm like, "Well, we don't have anything next." I'm like, "Why'd you do this?" I'm like, "Well, it's really about showing that we have the power to connect when we're open to it." And what's also really beautiful is think about the things we just shared 2 hours with strangers that I can say every single reservation, except with maybe one, someone has said, I've never told my closest friend what I'm telling you guys.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
it's really, really interesting. So,
Yeah.
no,
That's
good.
beautiful, man. I'm really glad to hear that, and yeah, I'm absolutely here for that approach to the world. Just keep it personal, keep it close, keep it heartfelt, and good things will come.
So, talking about this new year, share with me your hopes for Rose and Kingdoms and how can we learn more, find out more, support more?
I think roadsandkingdoms.com is the gateway for all of this because it does have kind of our membership there and the content that we're going to be publishing for 2026. I want it to feel like 2016. I want it to be, when we were really rolling with Tony and we had that energy and we had the resources to do this great journalism. I feel like we can get back there. And it's even more powerful now because it's not one man, it's 1,000 people. And that's going to give us a really wide and strong stance to return to storytelling. And that's my hope. And it's going to be a very analog year for us. We're going to be on the phone, getting writers and photographers to go out and meet people and tell their stories and bring it back to us. And we're going to be publishing it all. And we're doing it in print. We're doing it on the website. And that's my dream. It's already there. I'm just been really riding this wave of endorphins since we were able to put out the print issue, and just, seeing all the collaborators come together and really pitch in on this unique, one of a kind project. It's special. It answers a lot of sort of a lot of things that I was lacking that I didn't even know I was lacking in
Yeah.
my professional life. I think just to be able to put print together is really special. So that's the year. That's the vibe.
I love it. Ooh, vibe. You got it in there again. All right. So my closing question is a two-parter. Going back to Nathan in the Irish pub, I think it was in Russia. And if you could go back, what would you tell him? What would you, or what would you think about what you're doing right now?
I would tell him he's doing exactly what he should be doing. I think you see it with young people. They can actually they could be right where they need to be, but the anxiety is so high, and that
Mhm.
sense of like, am I doing it right? Like, am I missing out on something? Is there something I should be doing or I could be doing that's not this? But I have found even my baser instincts, my love of Irish bars and weird, far flung capitals. Even those things have turned out to be a building block for what has been a great career to help me see the world, support this family I love. Turns out I was doing it right all along.
Oh
I
man, that's great.
counsel young people that talk to me, particularly in journalism, all the time. Just like, take it easy, take a breath. You know, you're doing it right. Like, just follow what you're interested in, and the world will bend to you.
So in closing, do you and Matt ever just look at each other and giggle or think about what would Tony say right now about some of the stuff you're doing?
Yeah, Tony had a phrase for us. I think he called it grab ass when we were doing something that, you know, because although we were partners, he was Uncle Tony always to us. I
Yeah.
mean, he was a generation ahead of us, and and certainly a much more accomplished man. Anytime Matt and I were like in our cups or had, some strange idea, which wasn't that infrequent, I think grab ass was the going thing. So we do from time to time, just kind of check with each other. Is this grab ass? Yeah, I think this is. But again, even the things that were not Bourdainian that I knew that, he was like, again, with this thing, I celebrate that. That's who Matt and I are. And I
Yeah.
think, as much as we miss Tony and all of us who worked with him and loves him, miss him, his message always was to just be himself, and that's something to take with us as well. So even if it means grab ass, we're just going to be ourselves. That's all right.
Oh man, I'm excited that Roads and Kingdoms is here and it's going to be itself, and you and Matt are at the helm. It's beautiful, and thank you so much for your time today, my man.
So appreciated. I hope we can, to follow up on the themes. I hope we can actually meet in real life. That's
Yeah.
obviously what is required.